All right, let's move on to this now. The fate of the controversial Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill, also known as BELA for short, is now in the hands of the National Council of Provinces. A number of parties and groups have rejected the proposed law, saying it will infringe on the language rights and religious freedoms. It also seeks to criminalize parents and caregivers whose children are not attending school. Let's speak more about this now with education expert, Professor Mary Metcalfe. Professor, good evening to you, and thank you for your time. Which clauses stand out for you about this BELA bill, or perhaps I should say, which clauses require urgent attention?
You know, Oli, what I find very interesting about all the controversy is that a lot of it appears to me, and I'll explain it, to be manufactured by people with access to social media. So I will try and summarize for you the key controversies that have dominated the public hearings, that have dominated the social media debates. And I will address your questions in terms of religious matters, as well as language, as well as powers. So if you'll allow me, I'll try and be very quick.
Please go.
You know, there's the question of the powers of school governing bodies and the issue of compulsory education. Now, these two are related for me. Firstly, compulsory education is something that we should celebrate because it means that the rights of all children to attend school are protected for the period of compulsory education, which is now 10 years once the bill is adopted. And that means children from the age of 5 to the age of 15. Where I do have some sympathy for some of the concerns expressed is that the bill says that if you do not send your child to school, you can be liable for a prison sentence. Now, that has been in the laws of the country since we adopted the South African Schools Act in 1996. But I am not aware, and I've actually tried to Google it, that anybody has ever been sent to prison because they have not sent their children to school. Now, not being a lawyer, this is my understanding of it, is that if a person is refusing to send their child to school, not only send them to school, but to register them, for example, if they're going to be teaching them at home, that's another form of schooling. If they do not want to send their child to school, we as a country, by passing this bill, have said it's a priority that we protect the rights of all children. Now, you don't immediately rush to court. There would be a process by which I think parents' need for support would be explored. There would be a process by which, if it goes to court, the person presiding would make a deliberation, would deliberate and would make a finding in terms of this is the penalty that the law allows. So if we make education compulsory, then I think there has to be a penalty, but I think that it isn't necessarily criminalizing. So we won't have a discussion about why it's important to make education compulsory, why it's important for society as well as individuals. The second issue about powers and compulsory education is that, you know, prior to the South African Schools Act, which was passed in 1996, school governing bodies had very limited powers, Now, since 1996, there have been several legal tussles between school governing bodies and the state, usually provincial education departments, about what powers do school governing bodies have. So I'm going to use the example of language. You see, because education is compulsory, it doesn't only lay an obligation on parents, it also lays an obligation on the state. If you make education compulsory as the state, it means you have to provide education places. Now, that's a huge debate in itself in terms of our shifting demographics. But once you have to make a space for all children, have to make sure that all public schools are used optimally where they're needed. And language demographics changes. You know that yourself. I'm sure you're aware of areas that may have been monolingual, which are now multilingual. So the responsibility of the state in terms of BELA is that it must place all learners. School governing bodies still determine their language policy, but all of these actions and court cases between schools and provincial education departments have clarified what are the kinds of processes of consultation that are required. And the process of consultation are now spelled out very clearly in the Act. And actually, they place huge obligations on the head of department and his officials in a province to inform the school, to inform the community, to listen. And so actually I see it as a strengthening of the role of the school governing body in terms of them now knowing quite clearly the responsibilities they have in terms of working with the department to make sure all children are placed, and what are their rights in terms of expectations for consultation and appealing. So I know I've spoken long, you've been very generous. I don't know what all of the controversy is about. I think that possibly this is election season, people are being fed misinformation as far as I'm concerned, and I really do believe that.
Yeah. All right. So you hold the view that this is possibly manufactured outrage. Let's then deal with just some of what you have already dealt with. So we've dealt with making grade R compulsory. We've dealt with criminalizing parental neglect.
Yeah.
Those are parents who've got to ensure that children do go to school. If they don't, then there is punishment for that. In fact, under that particular topic, there is another element to it, which is that those who disrupt schooling activities also may face jail time of up to 12 months. Surely that's a good move.
You know, I won't talk about the particular community, but I worked in one of the provinces where the community was so enraged by the condition of their roads, with good reason, that they stopped children going to school for months, I think.
Yeah.
Now, you cannot use this huge national issue of ensuring children go to school to try and hold government to ransom. I thought that was outrageous, and I don't think that there's anything in the statute books that prevented them from doing it. So to consciously use schooling and forcibly preventing children from go to school as a bargaining chip, well, I think let's make that at least illegal, which then means there's a legal process for it to be evaluated. That's what it means for something to be illegal. It doesn't mean you go to jail the next day. It means there's a process where you can present your arguments in the light of that ruling.
Yeah. Let's then move on to the ban on corporal punishment. Because what this bill says is that this is a mere affirmation of this. It reiterates it. And so the question is, why would there be no adherence to this by some educators? And is the current punishment for this, for continuing to do this whilst knowing that it is illegal, is that severe enough, you think?
Yeah, wonderful question. When you were beginning to question it, I was getting ready to say to you something that I always use as an argument about why corporal punishment should not be permissible. And I can't remember who said it. It could have been Basil Manuel from Naptosa. But he said, it is not legal for one adult to hit another adult. why should we make it legal for one adult to hit a child?
Exactly.
And I absolutely agree. There's nothing educational in hitting a child. Now, to come to your question about are the measures strong enough? There's recently been a court finding. I think it's the Centre for Child Law went to court because they were outraged at exactly what your question is asking. That teachers were giving suspended sentences, that measures to prevent corporal punishment were not taken seriously enough by the South African Council of Educators. And the court ruled in support of the Centre for Child Law. And the South African Council of Educators, which is the professional body governing the conduct of teachers, and in terms of which they have the responsibility to determine who's a teacher and who doesn't have the professional status of a teacher, they've been instructed to address this. And I think I would totally support that. And from your question, I think you would too. We have to not only make sure that there's sufficient censure and appropriate action taken against teachers who practice corporal punishment, but we also have to call on all of our teacher unions, all of our professional associations to have a campaign explaining to teachers why this is just completely not permissible.
Yeah.
But also we need to support teachers in the complex situations of the classroom and in society where, for whatever reason, they become overwhelmed. We have to support them with alternatives.
Yeah. Professor Metcalfe, final question to you, and briefly, if you can. The totality of what we've discussed, I suppose, is what has been dominating public discourse. Let's conclude it then on one of the points you made earlier, that if you're going to make education compulsory, it then means that the state must ensure that it has the capacity to provide education to all. If children are still in mud schools, if children are still studying under trees because their structures are not appropriate for them to be gathered inside a building because it simply is not in good standard. Can the South African government carry this through to ensure that every child is at school, if indeed this law is going to make it mandatory that every child must be at school?
Okay, so I'm going to say three things. Firstly, we have the highest levels of attendance at school than ever in the history of the country. We have achieved really good participation in the period of compulsory education. We need to extend that into the end of grade 12 or in TVET college attendance, but we've made progress. The second thing is that there are costs to the state of extending compulsory education by 1 year to grade R. And I know this is a subject of a lot of debate in the NCOP portfolio committee at the moment. But actually, we've got about 98%, 97% of grade R's in school. There are costs to the state, and the state needs to make sure there's proper resources. In terms of the conditions of schooling, I absolutely am as frustrated as hopefully all South Africans at the slow progress of addressing all of the necessary conditions. There is progress with, for example, pit latrines. There is progress for mud schools. But our constitution makes basic education an immediately realizable right. It's not something that has to be implemented as resources are available, as with further education. Now, I have sympathy with the state because we have a diminishing amount of money to provide the basic necessities. And what I think is necessary is for the DBE to work closely with the provincial education departments to carefully plan so that every child is in a safe classroom, safe and clean toilets, has a textbook, has the furniture. All of these have been tested in the courts, and the courts constantly affirm this is a fundamental right, not only to get to school, but to have the necessary resources. So this puts enormous pressure on the provinces and national government. But it's so important that we address the inequalities across the country, and it's the poorest children who learn under such conditions.
Professor Mary Metcalfe, thank you very much for your time and indeed your insights. A valuable discussion to have.